Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Barbara Coachberg, and on behalf of Beth David and Beth Tikva, our partner, we welcome you to our third class of So You Want to Be a Mensch? Avram has traveled the world with Via Hafta, Africa, Sri Lanka, the Caribbean, South America, Eastern Europe, Israel, and to the indigenous communities here in Ontario, just to name a few. On his fascinating trip to Argentina, he was privy to visit Amia, the building where dozens of Jews were killed by terrorists in the early 1990s, and then to the shanty towns where he witnessed unbelievable poverty, with people living in huts with tin roofs, and yet one man had a computer and a bottle of wine, which he opened to celebrate their meeting. Avram worked there to help Jews and non-Jews in remote villages to dispense life-saving drugs, whose pharmaceuticals were donated by Jews from Toronto, Leslie Dan of Nova Farm, and Barry and Honey Sherman, Zichronam Livracha, of Apotex. In 2009, Avram was at Congregation Habonim in Toronto for a service with his dear friend, spiritual leader, Eli Rubenstein. It was there that Chief Rodney Montague from Beau Soleil First Nation on Christian Island, the Ojibwe Native Reserve on Georgian Bay, decided to speak about his days in a residential school for the first time. And so Avram and Eli thought it would be a good idea to honor him with a plaque and wish him well for his bravery. In 2015, an article in Now magazine described his flying to Thunder Bay and Kenora, despite suffering from agoraphobia. Oy. But he decided to forge ahead, urged on by his need to spread Tikkun Olam and visit their partners with the Jewish Aboriginal Initiatives, JAI, with the Kenora area chiefs who were developing health and education programs, women's shelters, and hydroelectric projects in Aboriginal communities. He was determined to create a relationship with Canada's Indigenous people, and they with us. A stop at the Dulles Ojibwe First Nation Reserve in Kenora District to celebrate the spring equinox consisted of a feast including freshly caught pickerel, bannock, roast beef, local wild rice, roasted potatoes, beans, corn, and fruit. And then Avram remarks, and I quote, "An Ojibwe elder chants a prayer. I'm reminded of Shavuot, a Jewish holiday connected to the season of the grain harvest and gladness." End of quote. How appropriate to be reading this to you now. In the Shavuot service and while reciting Yizkor yesterday, both Michael and Marshall reminded us of our obligation and pledge of learning and of tzedakah, tikkun olam, restoring and repairing the world and studying. Avram, explain to us, please, how much tzedakah one should give.
Barbara, maybe you should talk about that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you for your very well-researched introduction. That was very nice. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. And welcome to everybody. I understand there's a big meeting going on tonight between the shuls. So yeah, I'm really honored that you guys are all here. I appreciate that a lot. And thank you once again. And hello to all my dear friends and those people who I may not know. It's an auspicious evening, it is, I think, because this is our third in our series of 4. And I think we're doing a pretty good job so far. It's been very participatory. The Shirim have, and people have been very honest about who they are and how they relate to this subject matter, which has to do with chesed and tzedakah, the homeless, and so on. I would ask you to do the same tonight to get the most out of a shiur I think one needs to bring themselves to it. And by that, I mean they have to be present. They have to be aware, and they have to be willing to give of themselves, not just take. So I ask, please, that I'm a big proponent, although very often the coordinators of my shiurim do not like this, but I'm a big proponent of leaving everybody unmuted so that they can jump in at any point. I guess the only ground rule is if someone else is talking, if you can just let them talk. But otherwise, by all means, let's hear what's on your mind, okay? Um, I want to dedicate this year. I thought it'd be nice to dedicate it to all of you tonight, because of your presence and because of your commitment to Divrei Torah, to Limud HaTorah, to the learning of Torah, which is really at the essence of our peoplehood. You might wonder, why is that? Why is learning Torah keneged hakol, keneged kol hamitzvot? Why is it, the Talmud is full of hyperbole, and it will often say that, this and this mitzvah is keneged all the other mitzvot. And of course, in the area of Talmud Torah, it says that as well. So hyperbolic or not, why might that be? Why is tzedakah, why is Divrei Torah so important, or limud Torah, learning Torah? And the reason is because the Torah is meant to be our blueprint for truth, however you define that. And therefore, as a blueprint for truth, one needs to study it, one needs to analyze it, one needs to dive very deeply into it, as they would if they were studying for their career, or if they're studying to be a better parent, or if they're studying to be a better anything. The best people are those who really, really ensconce themselves in the Chomer, in the information that's available to them. By diving into the Torah, the first thing that can happen, and it has happened to me, is that my faith has been enhanced, faith in God. I can't really define that too well, not yet. We'll have to do another series on that, but I'm sort of starting to sense what faith in God is all about, whereas I was troubled by it before. And please understand that I don't have answers, really. I have more questions, but those more questions seem to be facilitating something. I'm also deeply, deeply, deeply proud, speak about hyperbole, deeply proud of being a Jew, like I've never been proud before. I was born into a Jewish rabbinical home, and therefore my mother was a Rebbitzin. And obviously I was involved on a regular basis, 24/7 in Judaism. I went to yeshiva later. And I've been a Jewish leader for really since I can remember. But until I really, really started to study Torah, I can honestly say that, it was Tikkun Olam that really drove me, repairing the world. And now there's a different dimension of which I'm more aware of anyway. There's so much of it, but more aware. And that is Limud HaTorah, and that is learning Torah. And that's taking me down a path where I have had the honor of meeting Amoraim writers from the 1st and 2nd century. I've had I've experienced deep excitement by spending some time with Rabbi Akiva, or Hillel, or Shammai. And all of these people obviously wrote 2,000 years ago, but still, when you study Torah, there's a life to it, and therefore there's a life to you. And that's what I've been experiencing. So Limud Torah is keneged hakol, keneged kol hamitzvot, for that reason, because without the blueprint, without the instructions to do the operation, that person's is not going to get healthier. In our case, our blueprint for truth, the one we are to learn from and the one we are to share with the world, is indeed Torah. So I therefore dedicate this evening to all of you who take the time to understand our peoplehood more so, and to appreciate our Torah more so. I think that's a really big deal. I really do. It's unfortunate that we don't have some younger people here at the Shiurim. And I feel young, and I'm sure all of you feel young as well. But when I say younger, I mean by age. And that's a challenge that we all have. And certainly, as these two shuls amalgamate, that will be a huge, huge challenge for this new entity which will be created. And I'm always at a loss to understand why it is that people aren't spending more time learning Torah, because it's so fascinating. It's so gripping. And I fear that some of it might have to do with how it's been taught. In fact, I know that, you know, very well. So we'll have to really, really up our game, and do our very best to impart what we know to the younger generation and to bring them along, because we're a special people and we have a special, special blueprint of truth, which is called the Torah. So with that, let us move forward. I also want to wish refuah shlema to those who are ill, and God willing, they should be well soon. And I also want to make a special blessing to those who are highly charitable, who spend a lot of time during the year sitting down and working out formulas for how much money they should be giving to the other, to the stranger, to those individuals who are in need of it. So the question tonight is, how much tzedakah should we be giving? And that's a really, really good question, because it's very clear from the Torah, from the sages, that tzedakah is really part and parcel of our life breath, of our DNA as Jews. Tzedakah in of itself is a very interesting word. It's not a word that you would find in English. There's no direct translation of tzedakah. Why? Because if, you know, Rabbi Sachs, I'm going to quote him again tonight quite a bit, he said, well, he always asks groups, what do you think tzedakah means? And he goes, 50% of the room says it means charity, and the other 50% of the room says it means justice, right? So he gives an example of how that might play out. And he says, here's an example. He goes, let's say I give you $1,000. Now, I can either give you $1,000 because I owe it to you, or I can give you $1,000 because I sense that you really need it. He goes, if I owe it to you, then I'm doing what's just. I'm repaying you as I'm supposed to. If I give it to you because I sense that you need it, well, then that is an act of charity. And he goes, it's fascinating within Judaism how these two things, although they cannot exist in the English language together, they're very separate. In Judaism, they can exist together. And the reason why he says they can exist together is because La Hashem ha'aretz umloa, because everything that we have, be it our fields, if some of us might be farmers, right, or our houses, or the material things that we own, La Hashem ha'aretz umloa. Really, God has decided to loan it to us, and we have the responsibility of taking care of it. So the classic questions that have been asked over the last couple of weeks in particular have to do with Shemitah and have to do with Yovel, right? Yovel, Jubilee, is a dynamic value within Judaism that essentially says that if you own a piece of land, okay, comes Yovel, and you need to return it to the original owner. And the question that's asked is, how is that possible? This is my land, and why would I have to return it to the original owner? Because God is telling us, number one is, it's not your land, it's my land, I'm loaning it to you. And number two is, you've made your wealth on it already. How much wealth do you need? In other words, it's a statement on equity. It's a statement on being equitable, so that we shouldn't have a situation in the world where 1% of the population has the vast majority of funds, and then you have the rest, 99%, who have whatever is left over. Judaism, while it does encourage a free market system very much, it also encourages equity in that way. So it's sort of a hybrid of an economic model. When we talk about tzedakah tonight, okay, it's not the imagery that many people would have of me reaching into my pocket and finding change and giving it to a woman who's sitting on the street and who's asking for money. It's much more than that. It's me responding to an obligation with Judaism, which is as important, let's say, or almost important as kibbut avim, of honoring my mother and my father, of not wearing shatnez, of making sure that that the Torah is written properly and that we do a bedika on it regularly to make sure no letters have popped up. That's a mitzvah to make sure that that's in good shape. Judaism tells us that tzedakah is to be righteous. It's to be just. It's to do what you are supposed to do. Now, the corral or the extension of that is that therefore, the giving of tzedakah is not really an issue, as we may have mentioned this in the previous year. It's not really an issue of, do I give until I feel good, or do I give until I feel bad? This is something that we used to deal with in the various different philanthropic environments that I worked within. But you give because there is a need. You give tzedakah because somebody out there deserves that equitable, that reasonable lifestyle that you have. And that's what God is telling us, okay? We don't want a situation where there's a hierarchy of wealth. We wanted to make it as balanced as possible, understanding that I believe if you study Judaism, there's a lot of stuff written out there about capitalism within Judaism, and from my perspective, it's completely acceptable. But there are limitations to how much money you can make, and by the same token, there are laws that are set out as to how much you need to give out. Okay. Now, I want to jump right into the deep end here, because I think a lot of you will know this already and have something to say about it. The Rambam, Maimonides, one of the great sages in Jewish history, one of the people who really set the tone for the future of the Jewish people, having to do with halakha, with Jewish law. And there's very few people in Jewish history like that. There's very few sages that are so auspicious in nature. He set out a list of 8 things, eight ideas as to how one is supposed to give tzedakah. But the way he did it was by saying, what is the best way of giving tzedakah and what is the worst way of giving tzedakah? So before we actually talk about how much you're supposed to give, although I'm sure everybody here in this shir gives much more than they're supposed to, let's dive into that. Okay, so simply put, what would you say? It's probably easier if we go this route, but I'm going to go the harder route. What would you say the worst way of giving tzedakah is? The worst way. It's still tzedakah, but what do you think is not such a nice way of doing it? Thoughts?
The best is anonymous, but the worst, I guess, is to tell people, how much you're giving and throw it in their face. In other words, that you're giving
I think
a lot of money.
the worst is to say to everybody, well, I'm giving to this person because they really need it, and embarrassing the person.
Which is what Marion said, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really interesting point that the two of you are making, but that's anathema to how we conduct ourselves within the Jewish community, especially the major donors, right? The top donors. All you have to do is travel down University Avenue, and you'll know that there's a particular family that donated an entire wing to a hospital, right? But your points are very well taken. It's kind of like they say in Yiddish. You know Yiddish, Marion?
Little abyssal.
Abyssal, it's pasnisht, right? To give someone money and then go up and say, oh, by the way, that person over there, I just gave them $10. So I would include that somewhere in Maimonides' list. But here's what Maimonides says is the worst way of giving tzedakah. And please understand that it is still tzedakah, okay? And he says like this, and again, like everything else in Judaism, it's a machlokas, it's an argument, right? Some people say, Maimonides says, the worst way is giving in sadness. You ever see a person who's like, they call them verbissen? They're just broigus all the time. You call them, Steve, listen, do me a favor. I'm trying to collect like $100 because this person really can't afford food for Shabbat. Oh, okay, I can afford it. You think I can afford it? You know, they're always angry, right? So some people say like that. It's just that they're angry, broigus people. They don't want to part with their money. They don't want to give. Some people, by the way, say Maimonides' worst way of giving is that he says that it's actually they're sad about it. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. It is said that Maimonides was referring to giving because of the sad feelings one might have in seeing people in need. That's a really beautiful piece, actually, you know, because is there a bracha for giving tzedakah? Is there a bracha for giving tzedakah, Sharon?
I don't think
Have you
so.
ever made a bracha before you put a coin in a pushka?
No.
JNF pushka? No, why?
No.
Why? Be logical. Thank you, God, for what? Thank you, God, for poor people? No,
You're right.
no. Well, Judaism doesn't say that. Judaism say, blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us poor people so that I can feel good about myself by giving tzedakah. There's no bracha. There's no bracha for tzedakah, and that's the main reason. But anyway, so, okay, so we're on the right track here. Remember, there's 8 of these, okay? I'll probably jump through them a little bit quicker. What would be the next way? What would be the next way? Just be logical. You have $100 on your table. Huh?
If you wait till somebody who you know is in need, wait for them to ask you, and you maybe hem and haw about it. Well, I don't know, and maybe, I think for anybody, if you know someone really needs, to make them go through that. I know we're talking higher up now, but I mean, probably the worst is waiting for someone that you know can do with it, and them saying, oh, thank you so much, and you say, well, it's okay, you know.
Okay, so at Pikri, did you speak Hebrew, Sharon?
No.
You're very smart because you're jumping ahead. Giving it adequately after being asked. Okay, that's the next one. So we're going to save some time. Good for you. Thank you. But the one that I was looking for was you give willingly, but you give inadequately. Okay. So someone says, okay, Stevie needs food for Shabbat. You know, don't say anything. Okay. Okay, I'll give you here. You know, here's $1. Here's $1. Here's $5. Right now. We know people like that. And we know that really what we need is we need a bunch of money here to help that person and that family through Shabbat. So thank you for your $1. It's still tzedakah. By the way, the formula for giving in Judaism, in other words, if you look at the end of 365 days and you say, did I halachically give tzedakah? It's a tiny amount that you have to give. It's very easy to fulfill. And why that is so good, by the way, is because the Torah says, Judaism says, no matter who you are, no matter what economic status you have within the community, you have to give tzedakah. So even if a person is, let's say, Nagid, let's say a person's getting from JNF. Thank God for our JNF, you know, who supplements people's incomes, Baruch Hashem. Thank God for the Jewish community that we have such a consciousness. By the way, Rambam said, he is never, ever heard of a Jewish community that didn't have a kuppah like that didn't have a free loan, right? And did not have an apparatus to give out tzedakah and food, like food banks when necessary. We won't go into the ethical aspects of food banks or otherwise. But that being said, everybody has to give tzedakah, even if they themselves are giving tzedakah. And by the way, you know why? You know why that is? Why do you think that is? My dear Howard Price, why might that be?
I think you want everybody to feel good about themselves.
Yeah, basically. Basically, that's right. Yeah, there's a level of integrity that you want everybody to have. You know, when you're sitting in shul and there's a bond drive, right? And there's someone who stands up and they give, I give $1 million towards Israel, right? and you're sitting there and maybe you didn't make such a great living this year and you're having trouble, giving a decent amount as you see it, or even more so as your community sees it, it's problematic. So sometimes people just don't give anything. So Howard's exactly right. It's giving people that level of integrity. Okay. So giving willingly but inadequately is the next level. It's still tzedakah. It's still tzedakah, but it's not enough. Okay, let's move up the ladder. You can throw it any thought as to the next 5 or so. Give me another way of giving tzedakah. Please tell me another way of giving tzedakah that's not quite at the top yet. And the top's fascinating. You'll quite like the top if you haven't heard it before. What's another way of giving, but not the best?
Giving it only after you've been asked.
Yeah, right. That's right. Giving, but only after you have been asked. Excellent. Thank you for that. And basically what the Rambam is saying is look around, be conscious of your surroundings, right? Be aware, know what's going on outside of you. And if you see that somebody is in need, right, Celia? If you see that somebody is in need, you take a step and you help them in the way that's appropriate. Again, hopefully you do it in a way which is still, like you say in Yiddish, which is quiet, which is respectful. You're familiar with the tzedakah here in Toronto. They give out food for Shabbat, so people should have Shabbat food.
Well, they care.
What is it?
Or, yeah.
Okay. He's my friend Bubu Zlotnick runs it, and he's been doing it for years, and they supply food to like 400 families for
Yeah.
Shabbat.
Tomchei Shabbos.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Tomchei Shabbos. And you know what? I know some of my nephews and their friends volunteered for it, and they'll tell you stories where they'll have a box full of Shabbat food, like chicken, and kegel, whatever. And what they do is they run up to the doorstep and they put it on the doorstep and they run away so that nobody should be embarrassed, not the giver and not the taker, not the person who accepts it. By the way, in that light, Judaism says that the greatest honor is to be a parnas for giving tzedakah. So let's say you work in a shul and there's a central tzedakah and you're responsible. If let's say a shaliach comes to the shul, or one of the families is in needs, the Torah says that it's the greatest mitzvah and it's the greatest honor to be that person who gives out the tzedakah. Because if you've ever done anything as sensitive as that, you know that there's such a big chance of, God forbid, offending or hurting that individual, of taking away that equity, of taking away that integrity. So there's no greater mitzvah, in that light, that'll be the theme for the evening, hyperbolic, than being a parnas, than being a gabbai, than being the person, he or she, who gives out money to those who are in need. Okay, give me another example of what Maimonides says. We're moving up the ladder, folks. What is another way of giving, but not the best?
Anonymously.
Who said that?
Marion.
Nice, very nice. So giving tzedakah publicly to an unknown recipient is the next step up. And then above that is giving tzedakah anonymously to a known recipient. Okay? So if you give quietly, nobody knows about it, just you and God, and the recipient doesn't know, Maimonides, Rambam says, that's a very, very high level of giving tzedakah. Why might that be? Why might that be?
You're not taking credit for it and making a big fuss, and you're honoring the person you're giving it to, because they're getting a gift without knowing who gave it to them, and that's a very high, I think, form of tzedakah.
Yeah. So Marion says you're not making a big fuss. You're being quiet about it. You're honoring the person, and it's all of that stuff, right? It's just humility is a really big deal in Judaism. When we ask about Moshe Rabbeinu and his character, one of the things that comes out consistently is that Moshe Rabbeinu was humble. He was a humble man. So humility is an enormous thing in Judaism. I myself have a very hard time being humble, right? So if I do something which I think is special, I like to share it, you know? But from time to time, there are things that I do which are very quiet because they have to be quiet because of the nature of what I do in life. And it's hard. It's very hard to be quiet in situations like that because I so badly want to share it. Some of it because of my ego. I have quite a big ego as well. And some of it is because of nachas, because I have a lot of pride. Okay, let's move up here. Giving tzedakah anonymously to a known recipient. Now, number 2, I'm going to read it to you, okay? And I'll read you the next 2, and then we can discuss it. Giving tzedakah anonymously to an unknown recipient via person or public fund that is trustworthy, wise, and can perform acts of tzedakah with your money in a most impeccable fashion. Giving tzedakah anonymously, so you give it quietly, nobody knows you gave it, to an unknown recipient, someone you don't know and they don't know, via a person or public fund that is trustworthy and wise and can perform acts of tzedakah with your money in a most impeccable fashion. So a shaliach, an emissary, comes to you and say, we're collecting money. I don't want to tell you who, but someone's getting married down the road and they can't afford a dress and they can't afford the chuppah. And I'm collecting money for it. So if you can give me money, and I can't tell you who it is. This is as much as I'm going to tell you, but you will be part of it in terms of your giving, but that's where it stops. Maimonides says it's a very, very high level of giving. I guess to some extent, you could probably argue, Howard, tell me if you agree with this. Howard and I were both at UJ. He was a volunteer. I was working at UJ. To some extent, I think that there were many people who liked giving through a conduit, like the United Jewish Appeal or the JNF or whomever, and believed in their allocations process. And that's what Maimonides says, who's trustworthy, who's wise. And not everybody did, but I think that's the idea behind a central body within a Jewish community, to be able to collect the money and then allocate it through a very wise allocations process. Would you say that's accurate, Howard?
Yeah. People don't always agree with the allocation, but it's probably the fairest way.
Yeah, because sometimes what happens is, and we see it more in our day and age, is that people get really excited about puppies. And I love puppies, so please don't get me wrong here. I love puppies. Give me a little chocolate lab and let me play with them for a day. I'll be happy as punch. But I really don't think that giving to puppies and their welfare is more important than giving to yatomim, to orphans, right? Or people who can't afford a simcha, or someone who can't afford food. You know, Howard and I both know that there are people in our community who make decisions as to whether they should buy their little ones gloves for winter, or whether they're going to spend that money in school because there's a particular program and they don't want their child to be embarrassed. That is not unheard of. That is very, very real, right? So Maimonides says, you know what? Trust the central kuppah because they're wise. And I would argue most of them are wise. Not everybody, and not everybody trusts them. But per my experiences, that's what I've seen. Anyone want to comment on that level of giving? Any comments on that? So here's the final level of giving, the top. Sharon, do you want to say something?
I was just thinking, if I had to choose between giving to an individual or 5 individuals who needed it, I would much rather give to them than to an organization. And I do that quite a bit. I do the organizations, of course, because they always need. And especially if I can give to our shul whenever an occasion comes. But if I know somebody needs, I'd rather take them and give them food or give them the money, or just say, here, I know you can spend it better than I can. And that's how I feel. I know people don't agree with me, but I do. I just
Sure,
feel
sure.
like,
And well, what I will tell you like this is, firstly, yeshakach to you, to having that tzedakah consciousness. Yeshakach to you, okay? Because having a tzedakah consciousness, thinking things through is key. It's number one. I want to talk about that in a few minutes, about developing a formula for ourselves, each and every one of us, developing a formula that we can live by. You've clearly thought about these things, so yeshakach. So what I would say to you is like this. Look, I also like giving to individuals. Me too. And there are people in my life through via Hafta and otherwise whom I've been helping out. And there is a certain nachas that I get by handing that person or emailing that person money, right? And that's okay. It's really okay. It's not the end of the world to feel really good about what you've just done and to see the person face to face. But let me tell you something. If I said to you, you have $100, you give all that $100 out to single individual people whom you know. So what if you were to give 25 or 50 and the other 50 you give to a charity? And guess what? The charity has someone who's going to match that $50. So now your $50 is $100, right? Plus the 50 you're giving to the individuals. It just goes further sometimes when you give in that way.
mhm.
Right? If everybody were to give singularly, the community would have problems. If we didn't have a kupa or kupot, we would have problems, right? Because there would be so many allocations towards things that are nice and that are important, but they're going to miss out on some of the fundamental things that are required within a Jewish community, right? Such as what? Every Jewish community needs a what? What do we have in our community that's so special? And Baltimore has it, and New York has it, and Paris.
Kadisha.
Well, yeah, Chaver Kadisha. Yeah,
I was gonna
right.
say that. I just wouldn't know. Yeah.
Yeah, Chaver Kadisha. I mean, most of them
course.
are through shuls, but if God forbid someone doesn't belong to a shul, they don't have a plot or what have you, our community has a Chaver Kadisha. It also has a rabbi who will go visit the sick, some very special rabbis. Kashrut, there's a whole plethora of things that are important that way. So I'm not arguing with you about how you give tzedakah. I'm just trying to add another dimension to it, okay?
Excellent.
So here's a beautiful, beautiful thing that Maimonides says. What's the very, very best way, my friends? What's the best way of giving tzedakah? In fact, it almost doesn't look like tzedakah. What's the best way of doing it?
Maybe wrong here. I'm going to jump in. I don't know which way you say to give, but when you give tzedakah, it could be to an organization or to an individual where you let them they turn their life around where they can make a living and be self-sufficient. So you're helping them, has given them a new life.
Right.
I don't know. That's what I would think.
Naomi Nemiroff, how are you? Unmute. So nice to see you.
Good to see you too.
You have a thought on this?
I like what she just said. I mean, that's the old tale of the, instead of giving a person a fish, teach the person to actually fish themselves.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I'd rate that at the top. I mean, definitely helping somebody independently become independent and self-sufficient certainly rates very high up there. But,
Naomi,
we haven't even mentioned the idea of just giving joyfully. Just giving to the cause that you want because you want to give.
Well, I think, don't you think that's sort of inherent, implicit? Don't you think that's all part of this?
I'm not so sure, because the first two things that we mentioned in the list, talking about giving because you're sad or giving kind of grudgingly.
Yeah.
I mean, those feelings come into play. And I think higher up there is really giving joyfully, giving when you want to.
Yeah.
When it makes you feel good, no matter what it is, what your cause is, or to whom you're giving.
Yeah, I would say, by the way, the only adjustment I would make to your statement is I agree with you, is I don't think you give until you feel good, although there's nothing wrong with feeling good, but you give because the need is there. Like orphans, let's say, there's so many orphans in Romania, right? If you support an orphanage, you make a kid's life better, it hurts. That hurts like hell to get the material. but you do it because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Okay, so here's what Maimonides says. You should talk to both of you. Giving an interest-free loan to a person in need, forming a partnership with a person in need, giving a grant to a person in need, finding a job for a person in need, so long as that loan, grant, partnership, or job results in the person no longer living by relying upon others. If you've ever spent time with somebody who's poor, and I don't mean that, God forbid, in any pejorative sort of way, God forbid, you'll know that there's a certain wherewithal to that person and to their life. The Talmud says that ani kemet, that a poor person is like a dead person. Now, what does the Talmud mean by that? Obviously, it's a machloket. That's a safe answer, any bet in any issue in Judaism. But what it means is that there's a certain life spirit that is taken away from a person who is consistently worrying about their next meal, who is consistently worrying about affording transportation for their child to go to school, or can they go on that extracurricular trip, about being able to clothe the family, about being able to close that hole in the wall in their house. It detracts from your life spirit. And as Rabbi Sachs was saying today, I followed some of his shiurim, is that in such a state, you're not able to be godly. You're not able to exercise your nefesh. He says there's two things in life that we have to look at. One is the development of our nefesh, of our spirit, and the second is the development of our body, of our physical. And what he means by that is the first thing we need to take care of is ourselves, to make sure that we're eating. It's the classic hierarchy of need stuff. I don't have to tell you about that. So ani kemet basically means that the person has not been able to take care of their physical. By physical, we mean eating and clothing, etc. Enough so that they really, really cannot commit to the nefesh part of their lives. It's a rachmanis, it's very sad. So the idea that you take someone around, you say, just come with me for a second. I have a phenomenal idea for you. And I think that you have a very particular talent. And I want to encourage you to actualize that talent. And guess what? I'm going to underwrite your goals and objectives. I remember once there was a situation where I was working with some people and we were helping out this fellow, and he was of Tsuris. He was on ODSP, and he was of Tsuris. He wasn't bringing in too much money a month from the government, and that's a particularly hard way to live. Anyways, you could see that he had a real acumen. He had a real talent for taking care of animals. He was mummish like a dog whisperer. You know, people like that, like a dog whisperer. You know, you see them when they're with dogs or when they were with cats, and you feel like they're one and the same almost, you know? So we'll call this guy David. David was like that. So this group decided that what they were going to do is they were going to offer him an opportunity to open up a little business whereby he could have people come and he would clean their dogs. What's that called? What are those called?
Dog groomers.
Dog groomers. There we go. Yeah, dog groomers. And what was beautiful is that the one fellow who sort of spearheaded this thing, he owned a company. And he went to his staff and he said, this is what our company's going to do. Like, this is true tzedakah. And he said, we're all going to play a role in it. You know, we're all going to kick in some cash, whatever you can. And we're going to help this fellow start his dog grooming company. And they did it. And he started up the dog grooming company, and it was good for a couple of months. He was a bit of a curmudgeon. He didn't really relate well to others. That's why he loved animals so much, right? But the fact of the matter is, it was a really beautiful process to watch. And I think that was number one in terms of what Maimonides was saying and why he was saying it, because you're giving a person their integrity. You're giving a person their freedom. The worst thing is to rely upon others for your welfare In fact, there's a beautiful Dvar Torah that is said about Gan Eden, about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There's a classic question: is why Adam and Eve ate the only thing that they weren't supposed to eat? It's kind of bizarre, really. They're told don't eat one thing, and that's what they ate. They specifically ate that. Why? So I heard a Dvar Torah once. What they were saying was they were saying to God, look, I either told this at this year or another year. I'm sorry if I'm repeating it here. They were saying to God, we love the Garden of Eden. How could you not? And we want to end up here. This is like the end of our days would be so nice. It's like the Palm Beach, spiritual Palm Beach, right? But the thing of the matter is we don't want to start here. We want to go out and bruise our elbows. We want to scrape our knees. We want to go out and actualize our nefesh, our soul. We want to show our talents. And I'm a poet. I'm a writer. I'm a good accountant. We want to go out there and we want to do what's right. And we want to actualize who we are, our talents. And therefore, that's why we really wanted out of the Garden of Eden. There's a similar vort which is said about the Jews in the desert. We all know that the Jews complained and complained and complained and complained. They had manna every single day and a double portion before Shabbos. They had water. They had God watching over them. Yet the Torah specifically says they complained, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Remember that in the Torah? Jackie Mason, it's a Jackie Mason shtick too. Anyways, so the classic question is, why were they complaining so much? And the answer was because they were being taken care of. It's specifically that they wanted out of. They wanted to take care of themselves. It's human nature to want to, tend to your own welfare. So Ani Kemet speaks to that. I don't want to rely on anybody else. I want to rely on myself. And I want to be able to provide to those I love. Okay, so good. We got through that. Nice job, folks. Now, how much should a person give? Let's start with asking Howard. Howard, how much do you give? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay.
I know, I hope you were. No, that's the $1 million question. Ideally, people should give until they hurt a bit themselves, but that's not going to happen in 99% of the time. It's a very hard thing to define. And when I was involved with UJA, I sort of analyzed gifts among professionals. And I think a third gave what I called a responsible gift, a third gave a poor gift, and a third gave nothing. So it was very hard to define, but unfortunately, we can get into the frustrations of fundraising, but a lot of people don't give anything. And some people give more than they should be giving. And Avram, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you think someone is giving too much and you say, sorry, I don't want that much money from you. I know that's going to kill you. That's going to really hurt you financially. So I didn't answer your question.
Oh, no, it was good. You gave context to it.
Yeah.
Listen, Howard, during Operation Exodus, everybody remember Operation Exodus? That was the campaign to help Soviet Jews get out of former Soviet Union. Glasnost and Perestroika had come about. The walls had come back down, and 1 million Jews left the former Soviet Union. Most of them went to Israel. Some of them went to the diaspora. And I remember specifically at that time, we were working on that campaign, right, Howard? I remember specifically at that time that there were people who took loans from the bank to make a donation, right? They took loans from the bank to make a donation. And I thought, my God, that is unbelievable that somebody would do that, take on such a burden to themselves in order to help the Kuppah, in order to help the Jewish community, in order to give integrity and equity to other Jews. What do you guys think of that? Remember, it's B'shas Hatzchak. It's a dangerous time, okay? It's a dangerous time. What do you guys think of that? Yeah,
aren't we taught that you're supposed to look after yourself first and then you go from there? So that there are stories, I think, that have been told, whether they're in the a story that'll say that a man was told by God, you know, you've given enough. You have to provide for your own family first, and then you go from there, so that you're supposed to make sure that your own family and yourself are taken care of, and then whatever you give after that. That's how I think we're supposed to look after it in Judaism.
Yes, and I think you're correct, but I'm talking about a different sort of time. You know, we used to work with a guy named Marvin at the UJ. He was a lovely guy. He's passed away, and he was around during the war in 1967. And I used to ask him all kinds of questions about those days, because I'm fascinated by our history as a people. And he told me that literally in 1967, when the Six-Day War broke out, he said there were people. You remember the Federation used to be downtown on Beverly Street? Remember that? He said there were people that were lining up around the block to give us their silverware. To give us their earthly goods, the things that were important to them. And I would say, Marion, you know, in a situation like that, I would never tell a person, listen, give us all your money and your kids aren't going to eat. Don't worry about it. God will take care. I would not say that. Okay. But I would say, b'shas hatzchak, it's a bit different of a situation. When things are not good for the Jewish people, shalom neda, we should know that, that there are times, personally, I believe that it's a beautiful thing and the appropriate thing to take a loan. I really do. I really do. Because there's someone who needs it more than you do, right? But you have to make that calculation. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, so here's a very interesting piece here. There is a school of thought, a very strong school of thought within Judaism that you give what percentage of your money?
10%.
Yeah, you give 10%. 10% of what?
I hope it's your gross. I don't hate to think it's of your net, with the gas prices being $2.12 and people feeding their kids in Hebrew school, but that's what I used to hear, 10% of your gross.
Okay, anybody else? Sharon says 10% of your gross. Any other thoughts? Who haven't we heard from? Okay.
I heard the same, that was 10%. That's what you're supposed to give.
Okay, so you're saying if somebody makes $100,000 a year, that they should give away 10,000.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Any other machloikas in here? Any Beis Shammais? Naomi, are you a Beis Shammai?
No, I'm a Beit Hillel, and I
You're a
also heard
Beit Hillel.
10%.
Okay, so the rabbis deal with this as they deal with everything. Okay, there are those who say this is law. There are those who say it's a minhag, a tradition. Traditions are important in Judaism, but there are those who say it's a minhag. Okay, now even whether you say it's halacha or whether it's a minhag, there is indeed a machloket. There is indeed an argument as to how much you give and from what. All right. There's a wonderful book called Meiser Kesafim, tithing, basically, tithing. Meiser Kesafim. If you want to read, I think, the definitive book on tzedakah, it's called Meiser Kesafim. I couldn't find it on Amazon, but I'm sure the Jewish bookstores have it. And it's very, very good. Easy to read, divided up well into different topics. Meiser Kesafim states very, very strongly, and someone mentioned it before, very wisely, that if you make, let's say, $100,000 a year, really, according to our teachings, you have to deduct your taxes, let's say $35,000. So now you're down at $65,000, okay? You have to deduct your rent or your mortgage, your food, your clothing, your entertainment, all of those things that are crucial to your life. Now, your question is, whoa, okay, you know something? I'm going to go to Fort Lauderdale 3 times a year if that's the case. No, not to be silly about it. What the Torah is telling you is we don't want you to have to start taking from the kuppah. Okay? Judaism does not want you to become poor. So when you meet those people, and I've met them, somebody asked this before, who give away and they give away and they give away and they give away. I met a guy who gave away, he had nothing more to give. You know what he gave away? He gave away his kidney, right? That's not Jewish. That's not Jewish. What's Jewish is take care of yourself first, because you're number one. We all know the classic story of the two people in the desert. You're number one. And then what you do is you take a look what is left over reasonably with chachma, okay? And not including extenuating circumstances like the 6-day war. And then you give 10% of that. So 10% of 100,000 is 10,000. It was you who said that, Faye? Right? $10,000, okay? But what this Shita is saying is something a little bit different. What it's saying is whittle down your income, your revenue, and let's say you get a salary versus those people with capital and so on, and at the end of that you're down to $10,000. Okay, you give 10% of that. What do you think?
Sounds better.
Yeah, sounds better.
I'm gonna do the math now. Just sitting here.
Yeah. So, but Sharon, please understand that the poskim are not trying to find a way out for people. They're trying to find a way in. Okay.
Yeah.
So comes along the poskim and they also say, look, kinderlach, you can also give up to 20%. All right, but don't give more than that. Because if you give more than that, we're afraid you're going to become part of the poor within your community. So essentially what I'm saying to you is like this, is that there is a plethora of thoughts surrounding tzedakah and how much to give. But there's a lot of wiggle room in there. So if someone comes to me and they say, Avram, look, in 2021, I took a look how much tzedakah I gave, and I gave $1,000. And then this year I'm planning on giving 5,000 because I can. Kol hakavod. That's tremendous. I think the bottom line, I would say, my response to you would be, are you taking care of yourself? Are you taking care of your family? And are you doing it in a correct way? Not mishigas, you know? Are you doing it in a correct way where you're living a lifestyle which is reasonable, but by the same token, you're subscribing to La Hashem Haaretz Umloa, that really God is loaning this to you, your money, and therefore it's your responsibility to take it and share it for those who do not have enough. So we're relying on your integrity. We're relying on your wisdom, right? And like I said, there's so much which is surrounding this question. And there are people who say, no, you don't have to give 10%. Listen to this. It's a very interesting question. How much should a person give? So a minimal amount of tzedakah that one must give annually, annually is 1/3 of a shekel. Today, 1/3 of a shekel is equivalent to $4.67 grams of silver, which is roughly $3.75. If someone gives less than 1/3 of a shekel, they don't fulfill his mitzvah or her mitzvah of tzedakah at all. That's dramatic. That is dramatic. Okay. So if you meet someone along the street and they say, no, I'm makayim my mitzvah of giving tzedakah, I'm fulfilling my obligation. Really, how much do you give? Well, I gave $5 last year. They're right. That halachically they are correct. But we have to ask about the spirit of the law, right? That's the important question. So listen, we covered a lot of ground, and I will say as a synopsis, I think the most important thing is that as Jews, we recognize the equity, we recognize the balance that God is instructing us to create in our world. And it's a balance which is predicated on the idea that every human being, every Jew, every human being deserves that type of integrity, okay? So therefore, when you find that you have more than you need, you share it with the person or the persons who have less than they need, right? And I would just throw in a sort of as an editorial, I've met many people who say, listen, I'll give when I die. And some people can give more when they die. Ad Mea V'Esrim. Why? Because they're giving through their will, right? In fact, Warren Buffett was a big subscriber to that idea, but he has since changed.
Mhm.
You know, and I would always say to them, listen, why wait that long? You know, you can have some nachas in giving, and you can see where it's going. And also, there are people who are suffering today on your clock, as they say, on your watch, and they need your help right now. So I encourage everybody to sit down and work out a formula for their tzedakah giving. And literally, to take out a pad of paper or open up their word processing, their a Word document, and at the top of the page, write out tzedakah giving for 2022 or 2023, 5,782 or 83. And what you do is you determine how much money you make, and then take a look at how much historically you've given away, and ask yourself whether that makes sense or not. Predicated on our discussion tonight, or learning that you've done on your own, or research that you will do, or questions that you will ask your Rav, etc., etc. When you put it down on paper, it's like anything else. You know, we all seen those studies where you see things on paper in a journal, all of a sudden it becomes very real, and you know, okay, I'm not fooling myself. I'm either, you know what, I might be giving too much. I really might be, I probably need to put some money away. Or you might say to yourself, no, I'm not giving what I can give. I'm not giving what I can give. There are people out there who need this. They need it. And I have an obligation. It's my chiyuv, it's my obligation to give tzedakah, because tzedakah is not charity. Tzedakah is just. Tzedakah is justice. Tzedakah, and when someone gives tzedakah and they do it properly, they themselves become a tzaddik or a tzedekah. So thank you so much for joining our third shir. I look forward to seeing you next week. And if you have any questions before we wrap up, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Avram, for a very thoughtful discussion on tzedakah tonight. It's gotten me thinking, and I can tell it has a lot of other people also thinking very deeply about this. Thank you for challenging us as well to be here and present and engaging with our whole selves, and helping us to develop our own way and formula of how to give according to our own ability and to still give generously. I want to remind everyone about next week's program. This is our last of 4 will be next week, June 14th. It is generously co-sponsored by Beth David Women, as well as our partners Beth Tikva. And the topic will be, I don't know how to find a Tikkun Olam project, help me help. So looking forward to seeing everybody next week.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Avram.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It was a pleasure.